Welcome to the channel. Today we explore a powerful and often overlooked part of Dutch history, the Netherlands' colonial past. This story spans over 4 centuries, thousands of miles, and carries complex legacies. We'll examine how and why the Dutch built a global empire, the impact on colonized peoples, how modern Netherlands confronts this history, and what it means for future generations. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell so you never miss in-depth stories like this one. The Dutch emerged as a maritime power in the late 16th century during the decline of Spanish and Portuguese dominance. Their independence struggle led to the founding of the Dutch Republic in 1588, and ambitious merchants and adventurers set out to control trade routes in Asia, Africa, and the Americas. One of the first and most influential colonial entities was the Dutch East India Company, or VOC, founded in 1602. It was the world's first joint stock company, granted state powers by the Dutch government, printing money, negotiating treaties, even waging war. The VOC dominated the spice trade by establishing strongholds in modern-day Indonesia. Batavia in Java became its main administrative base, protected by forts and Dutch soldiers. Under VOC rule, the spice islands of Maluku, the Moluccas, were often forcibly consolidated under Dutch control. The VOC held spice monopolies, regulated local trade, and imposed punitive laws. Their rule was brutal at times. Massacres like the 1621 Banda Islands event, where Dutch forces killed and exiled nearly the entire indigenous population to maintain a nutmeg monopoly. In South Africa, the VOC set up a resupply station for ships at Cape Colony in 1652. Led by John van Riebeeck, Dutch settlers farmed for passing ships, later becoming an entrenched colonist population, displacing Khoikhoi and San peoples. Back in the Netherlands, competition and political chaos led to the merging of the VOC into the state in 1798. Eventually, the Dutch seized control of all former VOC territories, moving to direct colonial administration. During the 19th century, British control of the Cape Colony replaced Dutch hands until finally becoming part of South Africa in 1910. But in Southeast Asia, Dutch rule intensified. Between 1825 and 1908, there were violent expansions in Java, known as the Java War, and the Aceh War in Sumatra raged from 1873 to 1904. These campaigns consolidated Dutch rule over what became the Dutch East Indies, a colony of immense economic wealth producing coffee, tea, sugar, and rubber for Europe. Millions of Indonesians labored under plantation systems designed to enrich a small European elite. Simultaneously, the VOC period in the 17th and 18th centuries connected the Netherlands economically to Curaçao, Suriname, and parts of the Caribbean coast of South America. Suriname became a plantation slave society dependent on African enslaved labor. By 1667, the Dutch held New Amsterdam, now New York City, though they traded it to Britain in 1664 for Suriname, an early example of colonial bargaining. Slavery and forced labor marked Dutch colonial economies in Suriname, the Caribbean, and Asia. Millions of Africans were trafficked under ruthless systems where the Dutch participated alongside other European powers. Indigenous populations in Indonesia were subjugated, taxed, and uprooted. Despite limited European settlement, local elites often resisted in non-violent or violent forms. In the early 20th century, nationalist movements emerged. Indonesian leaders Sultan Syahrir and Sukarno formed political movements and fought for independence. Economic structures like the Ethical Policy, 1901 to 1930s, tried moral reforms, paving the way for education and nationalism. World War II disrupted Dutch colonial rule. For the first time, Indonesians and other colonized peoples were free from Dutch control under Japanese occupation. After Japan's defeat in 1945, Sukarno declared Indonesian independence. The Netherlands tried to reassert control. The Indonesian War of Independence, 1945 to 1949, followed, with suffering and diplomatic pressure leading to international recognition of Indonesian sovereignty in 1949. Suriname gained independence in 1975. Curaçao and other Caribbean parts became constituent countries of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. Yet the colonial ties remain. Citizenship, governance links, and Dutch language use endure. Cape Colony integrated with other colonies to form South Africa, a country whose history remains deeply shaped by Dutch roots. How does modern Netherlands deal with this legacy? For decades after colonial rule, Dutch society avoided deep reckoning. Colonial history was taught without critical reflection. Museums and public discourse celebrated explorers, but ignored violence and exploitation. This changed in the early 21st century. In 2013, Black Pete controversies highlighted racial issues. Museums started renaming colonial wings and displaying formerly ignored histories. The University of Amsterdam and other institutions launched research on Dutch slavery in Amsterdam's port history. Dutch banks paid reparations to survivors of child labor in the cocoa industry, while the government formally apologized for slavery in Suriname in 2022, though critics say it fell short. Street names and statues remain contested. Peter the Great, De Witt, and Peter Stuyvesant monuments, along with colonial-era street names, faced calls for removal or recontextualization. A 2022 poll found only 34% of Dutch people thought the Netherlands had done enough. 40% believed reparations should include material compensation. Dutch civil society has seen rising movements by Surinamese Dutch, Indo-Dutch, and Afro-Dutch communities. These groups question institutional racism, the Eurocentric view of history, and call for honest acknowledgement. Calls for formal reparations echo similar processes in other former colonial powers. At the same time, descendants of colonial officials sometimes push back, calling westernization and economic development benefits. These opinions reflect how the colonial past is contested among different groups. Dutch literature and cinema increasingly embrace colonial topics. Films like Sun Children, the 2012, and Niemand in de Stad, 2022, offer stories from former colonized communities. Authors such as Astrid Romer and Kader Abdullah give voices to Surinamese and Iranian Dutch identity. Societal reckoning is slow but ongoing. Museums now include room-size installations showing slavery's horrors, interactive exhibits, and survivor oral histories. In 2023, Amsterdam opened a permanent slavery past house at the former Dutch West India Company headquarters. In 2024, The Hague approved curriculum changes teaching colonial violence as part of Dutch history in elementary schools. Education has become more reflective. Students now critically examine VOC corporate brutality, colonial ideology, and the moral impacts of empire. Courses like decolonial theory and critical heritage studies appear in universities. What about the future? Calls for material reparations by Afro-Dutch activists are gaining attention. Some demand formal apologies, while others seek compensation to address ongoing socioeconomic inequalities in Dutch-born descendants of formerly colonized peoples. A recent 2025 University of Leiden study found neighborhoods with high Surinamese population still face 30% higher rates of unemployment and lower incomes, suggesting colonial legacies persist. Another idea is heritage tourism. Some propose tours of Dutch colonial sites in Indonesia, like the ruins of VOC forts in Banten or Batavia, but led by Indonesian historians rather than Dutch guides to properly contextualize ugly histories. What lessons have we learned? First, colonial power systems were built on violence, exploitation, and structural racism. Second, the empire enriched a small Dutch elite by enslaving Africans and subjugating Asian communities. Third, modern multicultural Netherlands is shaped by colonial migration, survivors, labor migrants, and students from Indonesia, Suriname, Curaçao, and beyond. Fourth, reconciliation looks complex. Moral apologies have meaning, but many ask, what next? Reparations, reform, representation, political commitment is needed to translate apology into policy action. So, what does forgiveness mean in the Netherlands in 2025 and beyond? In 2040, will monuments be relocated, reparations paid, and curricula reformed? Will Dutch society learn to tell an honest, inclusive version of its past? Let's recap this journey. 1590s, 1800s, VOC empire built on spice trade, slavery, forced rule. 1800s, 1949, Indonesia, Suriname, Caribbean colonies, slave and plantation economies. 1945-1975, decolonization, violent struggles, and negotiated independence. Post-1975 to 2000, silence and myth, occasional national pride in explorers. 2000-2020, sober reevaluation, education changes, apologies begin, community voices emerge. 2020-2030. Critical Public History, Reparations Debate, New Narratives in Media and Politics. Future. Real justice, new museums, shared stories, and transforming colonial heritage into lessons for equality. Thanks for taking this deep dive into the Dutch colonial past with me. If you found this enlightening, please like, subscribe, and share it with anyone wrestling with how nations reconcile their history. Now, we'd love to hear from you. What do you think is the most meaningful way for the Netherlands to reckon with its colonial past? Would material reparations help, or is education and dialogue enough? Share your thoughts in the comments below.